The evening air smelled like rain as Tanya Robinson rolled down her car window and took a deep breath. After 3 weeks in the small town of Riverdale, she was finally heading home. The clock on her dashboard read 9:17 p.m., and the road stretched empty before her, cutting through farmland and patches of forest. Her FBI badge sat in its leather wallet on the passenger seat alongside a stack of manila folders, evidence she'd gathered on a series of hate crimes that had been terrorizing the local black church community. Tanya adjusted the volume on her car speaker as Nina Simone's voice filled the space. Music always helped her process the heaviness of her cases. This one had been particularly difficult, not just because of the ugly nature of the crimes, but because of how the local police had dragged their feet until the FBI stepped in. 15 years with the Bureau had taught her patience. At 42, Tanya had seen enough to know that change came slowly, especially in places like Riverdale. But she'd also seen enough success to keep believing the work mattered. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boss, Thomas Chen. "Safe drive home. Monday briefing at 9. Great work out there." A small smile crossed her face. Chen had been the one who'd recruited her straight out of law school, recognizing something in the quiet, determined woman from Memphis that others had overlooked. Back then, people had told her she was crazy to give up a guaranteed position at a prestigious law firm to join the FBI. Her mother had cried for a week. Law firms have plenty of smart people, Tanya had explained to her worried parents over dinner. But who's going to make sure the laws actually protect everyone? She hadn't mentioned how her own cousin had been beaten by police during a traffic stop when she was 16, or how that moment had shaped everything that came after. Rain began to fall as she crossed the county line, fat drops splashing against her windshield. Tanya switched on her wipers and slowed down slightly, careful to maintain exactly the speed limit. Old habits die hard. Being a black woman in law enforcement had taught her to be twice as careful, twice as professional, twice as everything. One mistake could undo years of hard work. The case in Riverdale had started with vandalism, spray-painted slurs on the walls of First Baptist, a historically black church celebrating its 120th anniversary. Then came the broken windows, threatening letters, and finally, the fire that had destroyed the community center next door. Local police had written it off as teenage pranks until the fire. Even then, they'd been reluctant to connect the dots. Tanya had arrived 3 weeks ago, officially invited by the sheriff, but clearly unwelcome among the rank-and-file officers. She'd set up in a motel room with peeling wallpaper and a rattling air conditioner, pinning photos and timelines to the wall with thumbtacks. Day by day, she'd built her case, interviewing church members, tracking down witnesses who'd previously been ignored, analyzing the evidence that local law enforcement had collected but failed to process. She'd worked 18-hour days, skipping meals and sleeping little. "You're not going to solve racism in America by catching some bored teenagers," one local deputy had told her, leaning against her car while she photographed evidence at the burned community center. "I'm not trying to solve racism," she'd replied without looking up from her camera. "I'm trying to solve a crime." And it's not teenagers, she'd been right. By the end of the second week, she'd traced the crimes to a group of men in their 30s. A construction foreman, an electrician, and a corrections officer from the county jail. The evidence was solid: fingerprints, cell phone data placing them at the scenes, purchases of materials used in the fire, and finally, damning text messages obtained through a warrant. The arrests had happened yesterday morning. Clean, by the book, with no incidents. The sheriff had even thanked her publicly, though she'd noticed the tightness in his smile when cameras were rolling. Behind closed doors, he'd been less pleased about the corrections officer's involvement and what it might mean for the department. Tanya rolled her shoulders, trying to release the tension that had built up over the past 3 weeks. The case wasn't completely closed. There would be trials, testimonies, the slow grind of the justice system, but her part was mostly done. The evidence would speak for itself. Her thoughts drifted to her apartment in the city, the plants that her neighbor had promised to water, the comfort of her own bed. She'd pick up some food on the way, maybe take a long bath when she got home. Tomorrow she'd sleep in, then start preparing her report for Monday's briefing. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the roof of her car. Tanya switched the wipers to a faster setting and slowed down a bit more. The 2-lane highway was poorly lit, with only occasional street lamps casting pools of yellow light on the wet asphalt. She thought about calling her sister to pass the time, but decided against it. Nia would be putting her kids to bed, and besides, Tanya wasn't quite ready to talk about the case. She needed to process it herself first to package the raw, messy reality into something she could share with her family without bringing home all the weight. That was the hardest part of the job sometimes, the distance it created. Not just the physical distance of being sent to small towns across the country, but the emotional distance that came from seeing things others didn't have to see, knowing things others didn't have to know. Her FBI training had taught her how to handle a gun, how to analyze evidence, how to interview suspects, but it was life that had taught her how to carry the burden of this work without letting it crush her, how to witness humanity at its worst without losing faith in its potential for better. The GPS announced that she was 30 miles from the interstate. Once she hit the highway, it would be a straight shot back to the city. Tanya glanced in her rearview mirror, a habit formed from years of being aware of her surroundings. Nothing but darkness and rain behind her. She thought about the people she'd met in Riverdale, Pastor Wilson with his booming voice and gentle manner, Mrs. Thornton, the church secretary who kept meticulous records that helped identify potential suspects, young DeAndre, who'd managed to snap a photo of a suspicious truck near the church the night before the fire. They were the reason she did this work, not for promotions or recognition, but for communities like theirs, places where justice sometimes needed an extra push to work the way it was supposed to. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. 3 arrested in connection with Riverdale church attacks. The wheels of publicity were already turning. By Monday, there would likely be follow-up stories, maybe even national coverage if a slow news day created space for it. Tanya didn't care much about the publicity. What mattered was that the church could begin rebuilding, that its members could worship without fear, that accountability had found those responsible. The system had worked this time. Not perfectly, not without resistance, but it had worked. The road curved ahead, and Tanya noticed a sign indicating the speed limit dropped from 55 to 45 for the next stretch. She eased her foot off the gas, letting the car slow naturally. In the distance, she could see the lights of a small town, probably the last one before the interstate. She'd stop there for coffee, she decided. Something to keep her alert for the final leg of the journey. Maybe grab a sandwich too, since she suddenly realized she hadn't eaten since a hasty breakfast at the motel. The rain was easing up now, reduced to a light drizzle that her wipers easily cleared. Nina Simone had given way to Aretha Franklin, demanding respect through the speakers. Tanya smiled and turned up the volume just a bit. After the tension of the past weeks, the simple pleasure of music and the open road felt like luxury. As the small town drew closer, Tanya noticed the flashing lights of a police car parked at the side of the road just before the town limits. A speed trap, probably. She double-checked her speedometer. Exactly 45 miles, nothing to worry about. She drove past the police car, maintaining her speed precisely at the limit. In her rearview mirror, she saw the cruiser pull out onto the road behind her, lights still off. Probably just heading back into town after finishing his shift, she thought. But a moment later, the police lights came on, blue and red flashing through the rain-speckled night. Tanya felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the automatic response of a black person being pulled over, even one with an FBI badge. She checked her speed again, still exactly at the limit. She hadn't changed lanes improperly, hadn't run any lights. She sighed and put on her turn signal, pulling carefully to the shoulder of the road. Protocol flashed through her mind. Keep hands visible on the steering wheel, remain calm, be professional. She reached slowly to turn down the music, then returned her hands to the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 position. Through her side mirror, she could see the officer exiting his vehicle, hand resting near his holster as he approached. Tanya took a deep breath. Just another traffic stop. She'd show her credentials, they'd sort it out, and she'd be on her way again in a few minutes. She had no way of knowing that this routine stop was about to change everything. Tanya watched through her side mirror as the officer approached, his hand hovering near his weapon. The beam of his flashlight swept across her back window before landing directly on her rearview mirror, intentionally blinding her. She squinted against the harsh light, but kept her hands visible on the license and registration, the officer barked before he'd even reached her window. No greeting, no explanation for the stop, just immediate authority. Good evening, officer, Tanya said, keeping her voice even and professional. May I ask why I'm being pulled over? The officer, she could now see his nameplate read Harmon, scowled down at her. He was middle-aged with a weathered face and cold eyes that seemed to harden as he looked at her. I said license and registration, he repeated, louder this time. You were speeding. Tanya knew she hadn't been speeding. Her cruise control had been set precisely at the limit. But 15 years in law enforcement had taught her when to push and when to comply first. Question later. I'm going to reach for my credentials now, she said clearly, telegraphing her movements. I'm an FBI agent returning from an assignment. Officer Harmon's expression didn't change. I don't care if you're the Queen of England. License and registration, now. Tanya slowly reached toward the passenger seat where her FBI credentials lay alongside her purse. Before her fingers could touch either, Harmon's voice cut through the night air. What are you reaching for? Keep your hands where I can see them. His hand moved to his weapon and Tanya froze instantly. My credentials are on the passenger seat, sir, she said, her voice still calm despite the adrenaline now flooding her system. My FBI badge and identification. I was reaching for them as requested. Get out of the car, Harmon demanded suddenly. Now. Officer Harmon, Tanya said, using his name deliberately, a technique she taught at de-escalation seminars. There seems to be a misunderstanding. If you'll allow me to show you my credentials, I said get out. His voice rose to a shout. He stepped back and opened her door roughly. Out now! Tanya knew this moment was critical. Any wrong move could escalate the situation beyond repair. She unbuckled her seatbelt slowly and turned in her seat. I'm complying, Officer Harmon, she said. I'm getting out slowly. As she stepped out of the car, the rain had picked up again, immediately dampening her blouse. Harmon stepped uncomfortably close, invading her personal space in a classic intimidation tactic. Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle, he ordered. Officer, I am Special Agent Tanya Robinson with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, she said, her voice firm but not confrontational. I'm currently on duty returning from a federal investigation. My credentials are on the passenger seat. I'd like to show them to you. Harmon's face twisted with something that looked like disgust. Yeah, right. And I'm the director of the CIA. Hands on the car, now. A car drove past slowly, its headlights briefly illuminating the scene. A black woman in professional attire and a white police officer with his hand on his weapon. The driver craned their neck to look but didn't stop. Tanya turned and placed her hands on the roof of her sedan as instructed, rain now running down her face. She took a deep breath, calculating her options. This was exactly the kind of situation she'd trained FBI agents and local police to avoid. An unnecessary escalation based on poor communication and, she was increasingly certain, prejudice. Spread your legs, Harmon ordered, kicking at her ankles to widen her stance. Without warning, he began patting her down with unnecessary force. Tanya remained still, keeping her breathing steady even as her heart raced. She'd been trained for high-stress situations, but there was always something uniquely threatening about being on this side of law enforcement power. Officer Harmon, she tried again. If you check the passenger seat, you'll find my FBI credentials. Badge number 7842. You can call the field office to verify my identity. The number is— Shut up, he snapped, finishing his pat-down. He stepped back slightly. You expect me to believe you're FBI? What's a Fed doing out here in the middle of nowhere? This was her opening. I've been investigating the hate crimes at First Baptist Church in Riverdale, she explained. The arson case that made the news yesterday. Those were my arrests. If you'll let me show you my credentials. Oh, that case, Harmon said, his tone shifting slightly. The one where they locked up good men over some church vandalism. Tanya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. The subtle shift in his voice told her everything she needed to know about where his sympathies lay. 3 men were arrested for federal hate crimes, arson, and conspiracy, she corrected firmly. Now I'd appreciate it if you'd allow me to show you my identification. Instead of responding, Harmon walked to her passenger door and yanked it open. Tanya watched him through the windows as he rifled roughly through her things, picking up her FBI badge wallet and flipping it open. For a moment, she thought the situation would resolve. He was looking at her credentials now, but instead of acknowledging his mistake, Harmon emerged holding her badge with a contemptuous expression. This supposed to impress me? He asked, waving it dismissively. You can buy these things online these days. Real convincing fake. Tanya felt her patience thinning but kept her voice level. That is an authentic FBI badge, Officer Harmon. The identification card has security features that can't be duplicated. If you look closely, turn around. He cut her off, pulling handcuffs from his belt. You're making a serious mistake, Tanya warned, not moving. Call your supervisor, or call the FBI field office. I can give you the number. I said turn around. He grabbed her shoulder roughly, spinning her to face the car again. You're being detained for impersonating a federal officer. That's a felony. Before she could protest further, he had snapped a handcuff onto one wrist and was forcing her other arm behind her back. The cold metal bit into her skin as he tightened them deliberately too tight. These cuffs are too tight, she said calmly. They're cutting off circulation to my hands. Harmon ignored her, instead walking back to her passenger door. To Tanya's alarm, he began pulling out her case files, the evidence she'd spent weeks meticulously gathering. What are you doing? She asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice now. Those are confidential federal documents. You have no authority to access them. Looking for more of your little costume party prop, he replied, carelessly dropping a folder. Papers scattered across the wet ground. Crime scene photos and witness statements now soaking in puddles. Another car slowed as it passed, this one stopping a few yards ahead. Tanya could see someone holding up a phone, recording the scene. A small mercy. Witnesses and documentation. Officer Harmon, she said loudly enough to be heard clearly on any recording. You are interfering with a federal investigation. You have handcuffed a federal agent without cause and are damaging evidence in an active hate crimes case. I'm asking you again to call your supervisor immediately. Harmon glanced at the stopped car and scowled. He walked back to Tanya, leaning uncomfortably close to her ear. You people always think you're so special, he hissed, his voice low but filled with venom. Always playing the victim, always claiming to be something you're not. The slur wasn't spoken but hung in the air between them, unmistakable in his tone and expression. Tanya looked him directly in the eyes, refusing to be intimidated despite her vulnerable position. I am Special Agent Tanya Robinson, badge number 7842, assigned to the Civil Rights Division. I demand that you call your supervisor now. More cars were stopping. In the distance, Tanya could hear the sound of another siren approaching. Either Harmon had called for backup, or someone else had called 911. You can demand all you want, Harmon said with a smirk, clearly enjoying his power. Right now you're just another perp claiming to be something special. He grabbed her roughly by the arm and began walking her toward his patrol car. The handcuffs dug painfully into her wrists with each movement. Rain continued to pour down, soaking through her clothes, making her shiver despite the warm night. As they passed her open passenger door, Tanya could see years of her work scattered on the ground, being ruined by rain and mud, evidence that could put away men who'd terrorized an entire community, potentially compromised by an officer with a grudge. The approaching siren grew louder, and a second patrol car pulled up, its lights casting blue and red flashes across the growing scene. A younger officer stepped out, looking confused at the small crowd of onlookers that had gathered. What's going on, Harmon? The new officer called out, approaching cautiously. This was her chance. Tanya straightened her shoulders despite the discomfort of the handcuffs. Officer, she called out clearly, I'm Special Agent Tanya Robinson with the FBI. Officer Harmon has detained me without cause and is damaging federal evidence. I need you to contact Supervisory Special Agent Thomas Chen at the field office immediately. The number is 555-7242. The young officer looked from Tanya to Harmon, uncertainty written across his face. She's claiming to be FBI, Harmon said dismissively. Got a fake badge and everything. Probably involved in that church case in Riverdale. I'm bringing her in for impersonating a federal officer. My credentials are authentic, Tanya insisted, speaking to the younger officer. Your colleague refused to verify them. Please, those documents on the ground are sensitive federal evidence getting destroyed in the rain. More headlights appeared on the road as additional cars slowed to observe the scene. At least 3 people were visibly recording now. Whatever happened next would not go undocumented. The younger officer hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Maybe we should call it in just to be sure, he suggested to Harmon. Harmon's face darkened. You questioning me, Reed? She's lying. They always do. Tanya saw the critical moment unfolding before her. How she handled the next few minutes would determine not just her immediate safety, but potentially the outcome of her case and her career. Despite the handcuffs, despite the rain, despite the humiliation, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not become another statistic, another victim, another tragedy. She took a deep breath and made her decision. Tanya looked at the growing crowd of onlookers, the young officer's uncertain face and Harmon's thinly veiled contempt. Her wrists ached from the too tight handcuffs, and rain continued to destroy her case files on the ground. This was a moment that could easily spiral into tragedy. She'd seen it happen too many times in her career. But she had an advantage most civilians didn't: years of FBI training in crisis management and de-escalation. Rather than letting anger fuel her response, she channeled her expertise. "Officer Reed," she addressed the younger cop directly, her voice clear and measured. "I understand you're in a difficult position, but I need you to consider the consequences if I am who I say I am." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Call the field office. One phone call." "That's all I'm asking." Reed glanced at Harmon, who was turning an angry shade of red. "Don't you dare undermine me," Harmon snapped at his colleague. "She's going in the car now." A woman stepped forward from the small crowd, phone still recording. "I'm a lawyer," she announced, "and I'd like to know the specific violation you're detaining her for." Harmon turned toward the woman. "Stay back and mind your own business, or you'll be joining her." "Threatening a witness," Tanya said loudly enough for every recording device to pick up. "Add that to the growing list of violations, Officer Harmon." She turned to face the bystanders as best she could with her hands cuffed behind her back. "My name is Special Agent Tanya Robinson, FBI Civil Rights Division. I'm being unlawfully detained while returning from investigating the Riverdale church hate crimes. I need someone to call this number and ask for Supervisory Special Agent Thomas Chen." She recited her supervisor's number slowly and clearly. Multiple people in the crowd began typing it into their phones. "That's enough." Harmon grabbed her arm roughly, trying to push her toward his patrol car. "Officer Harmon, you're currently violating Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. Section 111, which prohibits assaulting, resisting, or impeding federal officers." Tanya stated calmly. "The penalty can be up to 8 years imprisonment. You're also violating Section 1512, tampering with evidence in a federal investigation, which carries up to 20 years. She wasn't shouting, wasn't being combative, just stating facts in a clear professional tone that carried authority. The crowd had grown to about a dozen people now, with more cars pulling over to see what was happening. Every word she spoke was being captured on multiple devices. "I'm not going to tell you again to shut your mouth," Harmon hissed, squeezing her arm painfully. "Physical assault. Documented by multiple witnesses," Tanya continued, unfazed. "Officer Reed, as a fellow law enforcement professional, you have a duty to intervene when you witness misconduct. Your body camera should be recording this interaction. Is it active?" Reed's hand instinctively went to the camera on his uniform. "Yes, ma'am, it's on." "Did you just ma'am her?" Harmon turned on his colleague in disbelief. "She's a perp, not a witness." Reed straightened slightly. "I think we should verify her identity, Harmon. Protocol says—" "I don't care what protocol says. I'm the senior officer here." While they argued, 2 more police cars pulled up, their lights adding to the surreal kaleidoscope of colors bouncing off the rain-slicked road. The scene was quickly growing beyond Harmon's control. A 3rd officer approached, an older man with sergeant's stripes on his uniform. "What's the situation here, Harmon?" Before Harmon could answer, Tanya spoke up. "Sergeant, I'm Special Agent Tanya Robinson with the FBI. I've been illegally detained by Officer Harmon, who refused to verify my credentials and is currently allowing federal evidence to be destroyed." She nodded toward her car, where pages from her case files still lay scattered in puddles. The sergeant looked from Tanya to Harmon, then at the growing crowd with their phones. His expression suggested a man who recognized a public relations disaster in the making. "She claims to be FBI," Harmon said defensively. "Got a fake badge. Probably involved with those church burners we just caught." "I led that investigation," Tanya corrected firmly. "Those arrests were the result of my work with the Civil Rights Division. My credentials are authentic. Officer Harmon has had multiple opportunities to verify my identity, but has chosen not to." The sergeant sighed heavily. "Harmon, did you call this in?" "Verify her badge number?" "Don't need to. It's obviously fake." "Agent Robinson," the sergeant turned to Tanya, his tone noticeably more respectful. "What's your badge number?" 7842, she replied promptly. Supervisory Special Agent Thomas Chen can confirm my identity. The field office number is 555-7240. The sergeant pulled out his phone and stepped away slightly to make the call. Harmon's grip on Tanya's arm tightened painfully. You think you're so smart, he muttered under his breath. You people always try to play the system. Tanya didn't respond to the bait. Instead, she continued cataloging violations in her mind, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the pain in her wrists and arm. The rain had soaked through her clothes completely now, and she was shivering slightly in the night air. One of the bystanders approached cautiously, holding out an umbrella. Ma'am, would you like some cover from the rain? Before Tanya could respond, Harmon stepped between them. Back up, this is a police matter. It's also a human matter, the woman replied calmly, not retreating. She's standing in the rain in handcuffs while you sort this out. The least we can do is keep her dry. More murmurs of agreement rose from the crowd. The dynamic was shifting palpably as Harmon's authority eroded with each passing minute. The sergeant returned, his expression grave. Uncuff her, Harmon, now. What? Harmon looked incredulous. I said uncuff her. She is who she says she is. Harmon didn't move. This has to be a mistake. That wasn't a suggestion, Officer Harmon. The sergeant cut in sharply. Remove the handcuffs immediately. With visible reluctance, Harmon produced his key and roughly unlocked the cuffs. Tanya brought her hands forward slowly, wincing as circulation returned painfully to her fingers. Angry red marks circled her wrists where the metal had dug into her skin. Thank you, Sergeant, she said, her voice steady despite everything. Now I need to salvage what I can of my case files. She turned toward her car where her documents still lay exposed to the elements. Officer Reed, she called. Could I get your assistance collecting these papers? They contain sensitive information from an ongoing federal investigation. Reed moved immediately to help, kneeling to gather the scattered pages from puddles. The woman with the umbrella followed, holding it over Tanya as she carefully retrieved what remained of her work. I want to file a formal complaint against Officer Harmon, Tanya told the sergeant, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. And I'll need statements from the responding officers and any witnesses willing to provide them. The sergeant nodded grimly. We'll handle this by the book, Agent Robinson. With all due respect, Sergeant, your officer just demonstrated what happens when procedures aren't followed. I'll be calling in federal colleagues to document this incident. She turned to the crowd. If anyone recorded this interaction, I'd appreciate copies sent to the FBI field office. Your witnessing this may have prevented a much worse outcome. Several people nodded, some calling out that they had everything on video. Tanya finally allowed herself to take a deep breath, the first step toward processing the adrenaline still coursing through her system. Harmon stood to the side, his face a mask of barely contained rage. This isn't over, he muttered as she passed him. Tanya stopped and turned to face him fully. The crowd hushed, phones still recording. You're right, Officer Harmon, she replied, her voice calm but carrying clearly through the night air. This isn't over. What happened here tonight is exactly the kind of abuse that my division investigates. The only difference is that this time, your target happened to be in a position to hold you accountable. She gestured to the wet papers in her hands. These files contain evidence of hate crimes against a black church community. While you were busy profiling me, you were actively damaging the case against men who terrorized innocent people because of their race. Think about what that says about where your true loyalties lie. Harmon's face contorted, but before he could respond, the sergeant stepped between them. Harmon, get in your vehicle and wait for me. That's an order. As Harmon stalked off, Tanya turned to the sergeant. I'd like to make a phone call to my supervisor, and then I'll need to document the damage to these files. The sergeant nodded. Of course, Agent Robinson. And for what it's worth, I apologize for my officer's conduct. Tanya looked at him thoughtfully. Apologies are important, Sergeant, but they're just the beginning. What matters is what happens next, what changes to prevent this from happening. To someone else who doesn't have a badge to protect them, she looked around at the faces, watching her. Concerned citizens who'd stopped because they recognized injustice and chose not to drive past it. In their expressions, despite everything, Tanya found reason for hope. Her case files might be damaged, her wrists bruised, and her clothes soaked through, but she stood unbowed. In this moment of crisis, she'd maintained not just her dignity but her purpose, And in doing so, she'd created an opportunity for something beyond personal vindication, a chance for genuine change. By midnight, Tanya sat in the police station's break room, a paper cup of mediocre coffee warming her hands. Her clothes had mostly dried, though her blouse remained wrinkled and stained with road grit. The red marks around her wrists had darkened to bruises. Across from her, Thomas Chen, her supervisor, studied the damaged case files spread across the table. He'd driven out immediately after receiving her call. "How bad is it?" Tanya asked quietly. Chen looked up, his expression grim. "Could be worse. We can recover most of it. The key witness statements were in your digital backups and the photos." He trailed off, holding up a water-damaged crime scene photo where the ink had run, blurring crucial details. "That's our primary evidence of the accelerant pattern," Tanya said, rubbing her temples. "We needed that for the arson charge." "We'll figure it out," Chen assured her. "Right now I'm more concerned about you. How are you holding up?" Tanya took a sip of coffee before answering. In the 15 years they'd worked together, she'd never lied to Chen. She wouldn't start now. "I'm angry," she admitted, "but focused." Chen nodded, understanding the distinction. "The sergeant seems appropriately horrified by what happened. Harmon's been placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation." "That's not enough," Tanya said, leaning forward. "This isn't just about me, Thomas. What if I hadn't been FBI? What if I'd just been a black woman driving through this county? Would there be administrative leave then, or just another statistic?" Before Chen could answer, the door opened and the station's captain walked in. He'd arrived 20 minutes earlier, called in from home when the situation escalated to involve a federal agent. "Agent Robinson," the captain said, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. "I want to personally apologize for Officer Harmon's behavior. I assure you this doesn't reflect our department's values." Tanya studied him for a moment. "With respect, Captain, actions reflect values more accurately than words do. Has Officer Harmon had complaints filed against him before?" The captain's hesitation told her everything. "How many?" she pressed. "3 formal complaints," he admitted reluctantly. "None sustained after investigation." "All from people of color?" Chen asked, his tone making it barely a question. Another telling pause. "Captain," Tanya set down her coffee cup, "I could file federal charges against Officer Harmon for assault of a federal officer. I could sue this department for civil rights violations. And based on those videos spreading across social media right now, I'd likely win both." The captain straightened, defensive. "We're handling this internally." "That's exactly the problem," Tanya cut him off. "Internal investigations protect officers like Harmon. They don't protect communities." She stood up, ignoring the ache in her body. "But I didn't come to your town to destroy a police department. I came to build justice for a community that was terrorized because of who they are and how they worship." She gestured to the damaged files. "Officer Harmon's actions tonight didn't just harm me. They jeopardized a federal hate crimes case. They undermined months of work to hold accountable men who burned down a community center. The captain had the decency to look ashamed." "So here's what's going to happen," Tanya continued. "I'm not just filing a complaint against Harmon. I'm opening a pattern and practice investigation into this entire department." The captain paled. "That's not necessary, 3 previous complaints, all dismissed," she reminded him. "That suggests a pattern, and patterns require investigation." Chen was watching her with quiet approval. He knew her well enough to recognize when she was building towards something. "But," Tanya held up a hand, "I'm willing to consider a different approach if you are." "I'm listening," the captain said cautiously. "Your department needs reform, not just punishment. I want to see a comprehensive review of all traffic stops involving minorities for the past 3 years. I want body camera implementation and compliance audits. I want community oversight with actual teeth. And I want a complete overhaul of your training procedures with emphasis on bias recognition and de-escalation." The captain started to object, but Tanya pressed on. "And Officer Harmon doesn't just need punishment. He needs education. I want him to complete a restorative justice program with the communities he's harmed, starting with those 3 complainants whose cases were dismissed." "You want me to rehire him?" the captain asked, incredulous. "I want him to have the chance to change," Tanya clarified. "Firing him just sends him to another department where he'll continue the same behaviors. Breaking that cycle requires more than punishment." The room fell silent as her words sank in. "That's not the approach I expected," the captain finally said. Most people in my position would be focused on revenge, Tanya acknowledged. But I'm focused on reform. One officer facing consequences doesn't change the system that created him. Chen smiled slightly. This is why she's one of our best, Captain. She sees the bigger picture. The door opened again and Officer Reed stepped in hesitantly. Excuse me. Agent Robinson? There are some people outside asking to speak with you. Community members. Tanya exchanged glances with Chen, who nodded. I'll be right there. In the station's lobby, Tanya found 6 people waiting. Some faces she recognized from the roadside, others new to her. An older black woman stepped forward. I'm Beverly Wilson, Pastor Wilson's wife from First Baptist in Riverdale, she introduced herself. Word travels fast. When we heard what happened to you, we had to come. Tanya extended her hand. It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Wilson. Your husband was instrumental in helping build our case. And you put yourself at risk to bring justice to our community, Mrs. Wilson replied, taking Tanya's hand in both of hers. Then suffered this treatment on your way home. She nodded toward Tanya's bruised wrists. We've seen those marks before. Too many times. I know, Tanya said quietly. That's why I do this work. A young man stepped forward next. Tanya recognized him as DeAndre, who'd provided the critical photo of the suspicious truck. Those videos from tonight are everywhere, he said, holding up his phone. People are talking about it in ways they never listened before. Even folks who dismissed what happened to our church are asking questions now. Tanya nodded, understanding the bitter irony. Sometimes it takes seeing injustice happen to someone with authority before people believe it happens at all. What will you do now? Asked another community member. Will you press charges against that officer? It was the question she'd been wrestling with since the handcuffs came off. Her answer would shape not just Harmon's future but potentially the entire department's relationship with the communities it served. I'm going to do something harder than pressing charges, she told them. I'm going to push for change, not just punishment. Officer Harmon's behavior didn't develop in isolation. It grew in a system that allowed it to flourish. She described the reforms she'd outlined to the captain. Some nodded in approval. Others looked skeptical. You're giving him another chance? DeAndre asked, disbelief in his voice. After what he did? I'm giving the system a chance to demonstrate it can change, Tanya corrected. With verifiable metrics, community oversight, and real consequences if it fails. That's different from forgiveness. Mrs. Wilson studied Tanya's face. You're playing the long game. I am, Tanya admitted. Because filing charges against one officer might feel satisfying, but it won't protect the next person who drives through this county. Systemic problems require systemic solutions, and if they don't agree to your terms, asked an older man. Then I file the federal case, Tanya said simply, and I make sure those videos reach every news outlet in the country. But that approach burns bridges we might need later. Chen appeared at her side. The captain wants to continue our discussion, Tanya. She nodded, then turned back to the community members. Whatever happens, I promise you this. I won't let tonight's incident distract from the Riverdale case. Those men will face justice for what they did to your church. As she turned to leave, Mrs. Wilson touched her arm. Agent Robinson, what gave you the strength to stay so calm tonight, when he had you in handcuffs in the rain? Tanya considered the question carefully. I kept thinking about all the people who didn't have badges to protect them, who didn't have the training I have, who didn't have witnesses recording. I stayed calm because I knew my reaction would determine whether this became a moment for change or just another incident buried in internal affairs files. She glanced toward the captain's office. And because I remembered something my grandmother told me, when fighting monsters, be careful not to become one. Matching Harmon's hatred wouldn't have helped anyone. DeAndre nodded slowly. You're using the system against itself. I'm trying to make the system work the way it's supposed to, Tanya corrected gently. For everyone. As she walked back toward the captain's office, Tanya felt the weight of both her professional responsibility and her personal experience. The path she was choosing wouldn't be easy. Reform never was. But as she caught sight of her reflection in the glass door, tired, rumpled, but unbowed, she knew it was the right one, not just for herself, but for the next person Officer Harmon might pull over. For the Riverdale community still rebuilding from hate. For a system that needed to change before it broke beyond repair. She straightened her shoulders. ignored the ache in her wrists, and pushed open the door to begin negotiations that might actually matter. 6 months later, Tanya stood at the podium in the Riverdale Community Center, not the one that had burned down, but its replacement. Sunlight streamed through brand new windows, illuminating faces that had become familiar to her over the past half-year. Pastor Wilson sat in the front row beside his wife Beverly, both beaming with pride. Behind them, rows of community members mixed with uniformed police officers in a sight that would have seemed impossible months earlier. "Today isn't about me," Tanya began, setting aside her prepared notes. "It's about what happens when people choose to build bridges instead of burning them." The journey to this moment had been neither quick nor easy. After that rainy night, Tanya had spent weeks shuttling between the field office, the county police department, and the Riverdale community, weaving together an agreement that all sides could accept. There had been resistance, from officers who resented outside intervention, from community members who doubted anything would change, from her own colleagues who thought she was being too lenient. But she had persisted, drawing on relationships she'd built during the hate crimes, investigation, and her own unwavering belief that systems could change if people within them were given the right tools and incentives. 6 months ago, I stood on the side of a road in handcuffs, she continued, her eyes finding Officer Reed in the audience. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the shared memory. That moment could have become just another headline, another viral video, another reason for communities and police to retreat further from each other. She glanced down at her wrists. The bruises had long since faded, but the memory remained clear. Instead, it became the catalyst for something different, something harder than outrage, something more lasting than punishment. The police reform program she'd negotiated had become a pilot for the region. Every officer had undergone enhanced training in bias recognition and de-escalation. Body cameras were now mandatory, with footage regularly reviewed by a community oversight board. Traffic stop data was collected and analyzed monthly for patterns of racial disparity. Most surprisingly, Officer Harmon had become an unexpected part of the solution. "True justice isn't about retribution," Tanya said, looking toward the back of the room where Harmon stood, his posture stiff but present. "It's about restoration, of trust, of dignity, of humanity on all sides." Harmon's journey had not been a Hollywood transformation. There had been defensiveness, resentment, even outright resistance at first. But the restorative justice program had forced him to face the people he'd harmed, including Tanya, and hear directly how his actions had affected them. "Officer Harmon and I will never be friends," Tanya acknowledged candidly, causing a ripple of nervous laughter. "But we have found a way to be colleagues in creating change." Part of Harmon's rehabilitation had involved working with the Riverdale community as they rebuilt. At first he'd shown up because it was required, but something had shifted as he worked alongside the very people he'd previously viewed with suspicion. "Change happens person by person, interaction by interaction," Tanya continued. "It happens when we're willing to do the uncomfortable work of seeing each other's humanity. Even, perhaps especially when it's difficult." She turned a page in her notes, moving to the other success they were celebrating today. "The men who attacked First Baptist Church were sentenced last month," she reminded them, though no one in the room needed the reminder. Despite the damage to some of our evidence that night, justice prevailed. The convictions had been a victory not just for her career but for a community that had waited too long for their pain to be acknowledged. The hate crimes charges had stuck, sending a message that extended far beyond the 3 individuals involved. "But convictions alone don't heal communities," Tanya said. "What heals is what you've all done here, coming together to rebuild, to create new structures, both physical and social." She gestured around the room, to the new community center that had risen from the ashes of the old one. "This building stands as testament to your resilience, and the new relationship between this community and its police department stands as testament to your courage. The courage to try something different." DeAndre, now interning with the FBI's community outreach program, caught her eye from where he was recording the ceremony. He gave her a thumbs up, and Tanya smiled briefly before continuing. "I've been asked many times why I didn't press charges against Officer Harmon, why I chose the harder path of reform over the simpler path of punishment." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I became an FBI agent because I believe in justice, not just the kind that puts people in prison, but the kind that makes communities safer, fairer, and more whole. The night I was handcuffed in the rain, I had a choice: to seek justice for myself, or to seek justice for everyone who might come after me. The room had fallen completely silent. That choice exists for all of us, every day. Do we use our pain to punish, or do we use it to build something better? Do we settle for easy answers, or do we do the hard work of creating lasting change? Thomas Chen, sitting to her right, nodded slightly. In the months since the incident, he'd supported her approach despite pressure from above to take a more punitive stance. Their working relationship had deepened into a genuine mentorship that had opened new possibilities for her career. The truth is, Tanya admitted, I didn't know if this would work. I just knew we had to try something different. The cycle of outrage, punishment, and further division wasn't serving anyone. Beverly Wilson stood up suddenly, starting to applaud. Others joined her until the room filled with the sound of appreciation, not just for Tanya's words, but for the work everyone present had contributed to. When the applause died down, Tanya concluded simply, "This isn't an ending. It's a beginning. The real test comes in what we do tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Reform isn't an event, it's a process, one we recommit to every single day." She stepped away from the podium to more applause, accepting a hug from Pastor Wilson and a handshake from the police captain, who had become an unlikely ally in the reform efforts. As the formal ceremony concluded and people began mingling, Tanya found herself face to face with Harmon. Their interactions over the months had been strictly professional, necessary but never comfortable. "Agent Robinson," he acknowledged with a nod, his expression unreadable. "Officer Harmon," she replied evenly. He seemed to struggle with what to say next, finally settling on, "You could have ended my career." "That would have been easier," she agreed. "For both of us, no, why didn't you?" It was a question he'd asked before in different ways throughout the process. This time, Tanya decided to give him the unvarnished truth. "Because ending your career wouldn't have changed the system that shaped it, and because I believe people can change even when they don't want to." She held his gaze steadily, even when it hurts. Something shifted in his expression. Not gratitude exactly, but perhaps a deeper understanding. "The community trust workshops," he said after a moment. "They're making a difference with the younger officers." It wasn't an apology, that had come earlier in the process, forced and formal. This was something different, an acknowledgement that the work mattered. "I'm glad to hear it," Tanya said simply. As Harmon moved away, Chen appeared at her side. "Not exactly a fairy tale ending," he observed. Tanya smiled slightly. "Those only happen in movies. Real change is messier and slower," Chen agreed. "But looking around this room," he gestured to where officers and community members were talking, some even laughing together, "I'd say you've accomplished something remarkable." Later, as the event wound down, Tanya found herself standing with DeAndre near the memorial plaque honoring the original community center. "So what's next?" he asked. "Back to the field office and regular cases?" Tanya shook her head. "Actually, the Bureau has asked me to help develop a national training program based on what we did here, using restorative justice principles in community police relations." "Seriously?" DeAndre's eyes widened. "That's huge." "It's a start," she tempered his enthusiasm. "Change happens slow, case by case, department by department." DeAndre studied her for a moment. "You know, when I first saw that video of you in handcuffs, I was angry. I wanted that cop's badge. I know. But this," he gestured around them, "this is better. Harder, but better." Tanya nodded, feeling a sense of completion that had nothing to do with ceremony speeches or plaques. As she left the community center that evening, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and purple.